Hello, everybody. How are you doing? It is so good to see you all today. Sorry it took me just a couple minutes to get on because I'm having issues getting the green screen to work. So today you just get to see the green screen. But I'm so glad to have you here. My name is Katherine. I am a fantasy author, and today we're doing a indie author live chat that sort of falls into my indie author behind the scenes tips and tricks series about acronyms. Writing and reading related acronyms to be specific. So I'm going to pull up my list here because I got some amazing support. I'm going to call out some different writers and readers from Instagram who submitted a list of the acronyms that we're going to go through today. And if you're watching live, I would love to hear some of the acronyms that you may have heard of on reading and writing social media or websites that maybe you don't know before or didn't know before. I jumped into this writing world, we can say the Bookstagrammer world, but it's really, Facebook and Twitter and just anything writing and reading related, and was blown away by the number of acronyms there are for things book related. And we're not just talking writing. We're talking reviewers using them. We're talking readers using them. And I was like, it'd be so handy if there was one place that showed the meaning for all of these things. So let's dive into that today. So we're going to start off with one of the maybe more common ones. So if you get into these and you're like, oh, I know this is easy, hold on, because I actually have a whole list here, some of which I honestly had to figure out in order to do today's live. And if there are any that I missed at the end, please leave them in the comments so that viewers watching the replay can catch them. So we're going to talk for a second about book terminology. And I'm going to post some things in the comments too so that you guys can sort of follow along. Or maybe I can share my screen here. But hey, I see we've got people on Facebook today. So good to have you. So let's start with talking about books and reading books and writing books. First, you're going to have your WIPs. WIP stands for work in progress. And there it goes in the comments. So WIPs, those are works in progress. These are books that we are working toward writing, editing, publishing. So when you see a writer or an editor say, one of my WIPs, one of my WIPs, they're talking about works in progress. However, there's also the term TBR or TBR list that you see more from the reading side, and that is talking about your to be read list, your to be read pile, also TBR pile. You might see people say my TBR is too long, or here's another book for my TBR, and they're talking about the list of books that they have to read. And those can be kept on Goodreads, they can be kept on BookBub. People keep them in journals. However you journal, WIP is for books you're writing usually, and TBRs are books that you have that you want to read. All right. Oh, good to see you. Hey, good to see you on. We are going over our acronyms. Talking about books and reading, there's another term, DNF. And this one is one that writers sort of cry over secretly with our ice cream, but it's also understandable. Hey, DNF means did not finish. And this could be the book just wasn't for you. It could be that you were in a busy place and you picked up 3 or 4 different books. Not that I've ever done this. And you get to reading one and you're like, all right, I'm going to come back and finish that one. But right now I have to read this other one and get it finished first. And so you take it off of your currently reading list and you move it back to that TBR list we just talked about. We call those DNFing. But DNFing typically doesn't mean just going back to your want to read. It typically means I'm not going to read anymore. I can't make it through this book. And if you leave a DNF review as a reviewer, I'm suggesting this as a reviewer, not as a writer. I typically don't leave star reviews on books that I DNF, but I do leave comment reviews if there's a valid reason that I didn't DNF or that I DNF'd. For example, the one that comes to mind the most is one where they said it was a sci-fi, and I opened it up and it was a textbook, and I'm not kidding. It had a university in there and everything, like in the introduction. It was a science textbook. That is not science fiction. So I DNF'd, of course, and I was like, in my comment, this is a science textbook. So if you're a reader reviewer, it's up to you whether or not you leave the DNF or review, but that's for a whole other day. All right, so we've got some genres that were included on this list. It's a very long list. So some common genres. We're going to do mostly fantasy and sci-fi related today because that is my forte, but I would love to hear abbreviations. If you're not a science fiction or fantasy writer, please drop the abbreviation for your genre if you know it. So within fantasy, we have the obvious sci-fi. I'm leaving these in the comments as well. We have SFF. SFF is science fiction fantasy. Then we have UF, and that would be your urban fantasy. Urban means it takes place in a city. It's got to have some modern aspects to it. Not all urban fantasy is romance, so double check your subgenre if you're specifically looking for a romance. That leads us into PNR, which is paranormal romance, which is typically thought of as being urban, but not always. It's got to have some kind of paranormal love interest, like an alien or a shifter or a vampire or well, I said shifters, but things like that in it. Let's see. GN for graphic novel. That was a great one from Gams. Gams and Doodles. And then there's all different kinds of ones that you can do for romance, depending on what you're looking for in romance. You have FF, female, female. You have MM, male, male. You have MMF, 2 males and 1 female, and it just goes on and on and on. So if you're looking for romance acronyms, they're typically going to have M's and F's in there to some degree. And romances, if you're reading reviews, will say HEA if it has a happily ever after, or the couple gets a happy ending. So if having that is important to you, or if you're reading a book and you're like, I want to let people know this is going to be happy, then at the end or the beginning of your review, you can say this is an HEA book. And then people who don't like happily ever afters, or who like bittersweet ever afters like me, will know, okay, this is not a happily ever after. Now, I'm not going to say I don't read and like happily ever afters. I'm just saying I like a mix. But some people don't like that mix, and that's okay. All right. And then we're moving on into kinds of people to read your books. This is a great point that Katherine Glenn, who is an author, made in the contributions to the list today. POC, people of color, is very big, as well as LGBTQA+. Any variation of that will tell you what kind of representation is in a book if you're looking for diversity. People of color does not just mean Black. It can be different kinds of Middle Eastern and sometimes Asian, so look for specifics in the blurbs if you're reading reviews, but it'll tell you. Sometimes it'll say written by a person of color, sometimes it will say featuring POC characters as well. So those are some of the ones related to content that you'll see as a reader and a reviewer and not necessarily an author. Most of the other ones that I have on this list are writing related. And of course, if you're a reader and you'd love to hear the writing acronyms to follow your favorite author and know what they're saying, you're welcome to stay on. But I also wanted to just say, okay, those are most of the ones we have on today's list for the reading ones. And for reviewing, if you're a reviewer, you can drop these terms in there and sound all in the know, I guess. So yeah, let me know in the comments, what did I leave off from the reader side, acronyms that you've heard, and please, if you're watching the replay, don't forget to put an equal sign and put what those acronyms mean. You would be surprised at little acronyms that you think are common sense, that somebody brand new like me a year ago would have no idea what you're talking about. All right, moving into our writing, we're going to have things like WC. WC is your word count, and that was a great suggestion from C.H. Smith. So when you're writing and you're editing and you're formatting, you don't use pages, you use word counts, because pages are determined by the spine and size of the book that you're formatting. You don't know that until the book is written. So we edit and we write based on words. The average novel is said to be between 50 and 100,000 words. Some will be longer, some will be a lot longer. It depends on your genre. And if you want more information on that, you can Google Self-Publishing School genre chart by word count, and it should pop up. It's a yellowish chart, and it's really helpful in telling you what the current trends are for the word count length. So we can say our word count, WC, is today's WC, tomorrow's WC, my WC goals, total WC equal sign, and then it will say however many thousands of words that person has written. And then we already said, of course, WIP, work in progress. Also keeping in mind with characters, OC is an original character. This counts for both art and for writing. An OC is somebody you made up. They don't exist elsewhere. You're not taking some legally, now in the public domain, character and reimagining them like in a fairy tale retelling. So, for example, you could say Star Ink Press is publishing a reimagining of Rumpelstiltskin, but there's an original character in there. Her name is Scarlet, and she's the main character. And also, when you're going to request art, you can say, I need art for an OC, for an original character, a character I made up. And then you have to give them all the details on what goes into that art. All right, so going through the list one last time, let me go ahead and give shout outs to everybody who submitted on Instagram to our list today. We have CK Sorens, and she also mentions MC, so let me drop that. That's your main character, the main person that you follow through your book. Sometimes there is more than one main character, which will be the next acronym we're going to get to, so give that just 1 second. So CK Sorens is the author of the Trimarked series. Thank you for your contribution to the list. We have Sybil Mallory. We have Sean Scribes, Arashi Sensei, Gams and Doodles, the artist, who if you've not followed is incredibly talented. C.H. Smith, who's the author of The Princess Knight, and Katherine Glenn, who is a Japanese culture-inspired author who writes fantasy and fantasy romance, and it is beautiful. Thank you all for submitting your books. So the next acronym that we have that ties in with MC is POV. That is point of view. And there are a few types here that I'm going to spell out. You have first person. First person means it's through the eyes of the character. If you've read my book, The Vow That Twisted Fate, that is written in first person present tense. It's happening right now. Through her eyes, you're living the story as if you were her. Then there is the more popular third person. Hunger Games is another one that was written in first person. Third person means the narrator is not the main character or necessarily one of the characters at all. They're telling the story about some characters. And that third person is either going to be restricted to one person's point of view per scene so that you can sort of get closer into their heads and things like that, or they're going to be omniscient or all-knowing. They can tell you what Gandalf and Pippin are doing in Gondor. At the same time, they can go over here and tell you what Merry and Strider and Legolas and Gimli are doing over there with Rohan. So it's great for big plot-focused books. And I'm not going to get too much into the details there, but that's sort of the term. So you're going to have a first-person POV, a third-person POV, restricted or omniscient, and then you'll have multiple character POVs, and those are more than one main character. Usually there are two, sometimes there are three. Very rarely are there four or more, except in categories. That leads us into our next one, like Lit RPG, literary role-playing game books, where there's a party, a healer, and a distance shooter, an up-close like tank shooter, and then you've got your dark mage, and they're going on a trip, and maybe there's 4 or 5 points of view in that book, or GN, graphic novel. All right, so I know this has been sort of a brief overview with a lot of acronyms in it, but those are some of the key acronyms that we really see a lot in the Bookstagram community. What did I forget? What did I miss? Let me know in the comments and subscribe to the channel, because we're going to do another video in a few days about terms like beta or alpha when it comes to books, and other things like that, like ARC teams. ARC, I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler on here for the term. ARC is your advanced reader. These are people who read your books before they come out, and they are not always usually your finished books, but they will give you a review based on the version that they read. Not required, but helpful. So yeah, that's it. Thank you all so much for joining. I look forward to seeing you in a few days. I hope you have a great weekend. Bye.